Last Off, a novella by Laughton Chandler, narrated by Jake Wardle, with an afterword read by the author. This production is copyrighted 2013 by the St. Ambrose Press. Methought I saw 1,000 fearful wrecks, 10,000 men that fishes gnawed upon, wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearl, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered at the bottom of the sea. Shakespeare, Richard III, Act 1, Scene 4. Prologue. For months and months in that monstrous iron enclosure, there was nothing that had the faintest likeness to a ship. Only something that might have been the scaffolding for the naves of 6 cathedrals laid end to end. Far away, furnaces were smelting thousands and thousands of tons of raw material that finally came to this place in the form of great girders and vast lumps of metal, huge framings, hundreds of miles of stays and rods and scraps of steel, thousands of plates, not one of which 20 men could lift unaided, millions of rivets and bolts, all the heaviest and most sinkable things in the world. Filson Young, Titanic, 1912. Chapter 1. The other boy did not speak English, or else was dumb. He gazed at Hugh confusedly on being asked his name. What language he spoke, if any, was not apparent. 3 times he had asked him who he was, and 3 times he was rebuffed by apologetic eyes and silence. It was pointless to attempt asking more. By gestures, Hugh offered a game of cards, and at the small rickety table they began to play. The immense engines above them, though still at idle, had an unsettling effect, but it was time to subdue all doubt. It was the strangest of staterooms, and they, its first passengers, were now committed to endure whatever it should inflict upon their senses. The floor beneath them was iron, 1 inch thick. Beneath that was the sea. Directly above them, past another inch of iron, was the No. 1 boiler room. Higher still, ascending deck by deck, was the 3rd-class galley. Passages and storerooms, pantries, first-class staterooms, and promenades. Above everything, except sky, clinker-built lifeboats slept nestled between their davits. 2 miles off the coast of Queenstown, the great ship patiently awaited her last passengers to board. They walked nervously up the narrow gangplanks, some with eyes locked straight ahead, some more bravely glancing at the distance to the dark, choppy waters below. Others held back the line with their wondrous survey of the vast hull, spangled with rivets. This delay was politely tolerated of the gentlemen and the ladies, who were expected to be curious. Laggards in the 3rd-class queue were brusquely pushed forward. The ship's horn sounded, like a whale's ode to the deep. Hugh fell to shuddering as the boilers fired up, knocking 3 cards to the floor. The hatch opened above them, quietly, well greased. It was new, too, like everything else, though highly illicit. They were unpaying guests, or stowaways to use the harsh word, and their cabin comprised an empty ballast tank, 25 feet squared, on the starboard side, below the orlop. With the hatch opened, they soon saw 2 eyes peering at them, upside down, jolly, mischievous eyes, which then retracted out of view. A leg appeared next, and then a second one, uncertainly dangling. Then, with a blur, a boy with a shock of red hair dropped in, falling to a crouch, then stood up and turned around. He smiled at them, and put out his hand. "I'm Paddy," he said, "and who might you 2 lads be?" His voice was quick, his accent was strong Belfastian. "How are you fellers liking things here in 4th class?" Before they could answer, sounds caused them all to turn once again towards the hole in the ceiling, where another boy's voice, though muffled, was clearly purveying second thoughts about entering the strange cavern. Paddy walked beneath the hole, and looking up said, "Come on there, mate. It's not so bad down here. I'll catch your fall." The hushed voice of a man could be heard, also trying to convince the boy. His was the deep, gravelly voice of a rough man, one of the firemen who had helped arrange their journey. At last they saw 2 legs swinging through, and the reluctant boy dropped into the tank with them. Once he regained his footing, he looked back up as the hatch was quickly closed and sealed with the spin of a wheel. "Welcome aboard," said Paddy with a laugh, "though I guess we're really below board." "I think I hurt my foot," said the new boy, through thickly accented French. "Let's have a look," said Paddy. "What'd he say?" asked the French boy to Hugh. "He said he can look at your foot." "Never mind," said the other boy. "It's fine now." Paddy furrowed his brows at him for a second, then turned to greet once again his 2 original cabin mates. "I'm Paddy from Belfast," he said, "and this is the 3rd ship I've been on today, and the last. Barely made it, I did." From his manner of speaking, it seemed that Paddy had never known a stranger. Hugh put out his own hand, while he looked the 2 new boys over. "I'm Hugh," he said, "from London, and soon to be from New York, I hope." Paddy smiled. "Me too, mate, me too. And what's your name?" he asked, extending his hand to the other boy. His hands were rough, and his fingernails stained dark with filth. "Oh, he doesn't speak," said Hugh. "Nary a word?" asked Paddy. The silent boy cautiously shook Paddy's hand. "Has your tongue banjaxed?" exclaimed Paddy, tilting his head to one side. The quiet boy just stared for a moment, then looked again at his cards. Hugh began to point out the blankets, and the food, and the provisions of water. Paddy stopped him. "No need to show me round. I've been here before. I even helped build her, you know." "You were a workman, yeah?" "Aye," answered Paddy proudly. "Was a catch boy. Was on her near 12 hours a day for over a year." "What's a catch boy?" asked Hugh, though hesitant to reveal his ignorance. "Caught the glowing hot rabbits before they were bashed into the big iron plates. Not with me bare hands, mind you," he said, amused, holding up his dirty hands. "Gosh," said Hugh. "Did you know George then?" he asked. George had been the contact point for all of them, the fireman who had arranged their accommodation and supply. "Not really," answered Paddy studiously. "My uncle knew a feller who knew him, and that's how I got aboard. Seemed thousands of men worked on her, so we didn't know everybody." It was dark. There was a single colza oil lamp, turned down to a faint glow, and shadows flickered and dominated the air around them as the engines hummed louder above. "I think we're moving soon," said the French boy, swaying a bit as he spoke. "I mean, it seems we're moving now," he corrected, smiling. His shirt collars, emerging from between the pointed lapels of his coat, were rumpled and dingy, and had not been pressed in ages, if ever at all. His left one stuck out at an odd angle, and where he was standing it cast a deep black shadow across his breast. He wore his flat cap backward and tilted, giving him a rakish air that contrasted strongly with his innocent face. "What's your name?" asked Hugh. "Emile. I not like sheeps," he smiled. "You Catholic?" "Catholic? Church of England, I guess, but never really went but Christmas and funerals." Emile seemed a bit fallen by this, and turned to tend to the burlap bag he had brought with him, which bulged with contents. Hugh's own trip to the Iron Cavern had been a long and covert one, like that of the others. He had arrived with one of the merchants paid to bring him on, first to second class, up the long gangway, up flight after flight of stairs, and then, on his own, a long and nervous walk after the third-class stairway, hoping not to lose his way, and down countless stairs again, shying from inquisitive glances. He was once briefly stopped by a steward, a busybody who had begun to ask for his ticket, but he was mercifully called away. Then, to his relief, Hugh was met by George. The man spoke few words, but hastily led him by clandestine trek to the number 1 boiler room, and then to the small corner grating which opened into darkness, where a secretive and forbidden hatch awaited. To get there was over a mile of climbing, walking, evading, and descending. Hugh was glad to be done with it. Their tank, though unique in its purpose, was not unique absolutely. There were 46 such tanks in the double bottom, and theirs was one of the smaller ones, situated between the freshwater tanks aft and ballast tanks, filled or potentially filled with seawater on the other three sides, port, starboard, and towards the bow. The height of the tank on the part innermost to the keel was 5'3", and the floor sloped upwards gradually a few inches towards the side. The compartment was almost square. As the boys settled in, Paddy again broke the silence. "So where'd you all come from?" "London. And where did you come from?" asked Hugh. "You said you were on 3 ships today. How'd you manage that?" Paddy smiled at him. "I suppose I'll go first then, eh? This ship is like my second home. I told you I worked on her. Near my whole family did. I was supposed to get aboard in Belfast, but my nan fell sick. We thought she might die. She didn't, as it happened, but I missed the boat. My uncle thought she was doing it just to keep me back." "He thought she was faking it?" asked Hugh. "Well, yeah, that's what he said. Not sure myself. It was a tough farewell. I've got another uncle in New York, and they say I'd do better with him. Can't wait to get there." He took off his cap and tossed it on his pallet of blankets. "I'm sorry to ask," said Emile, "but what language you speak?" "Eh?" asked Paddy, bewildered in his thick brogue. "I not understand you." Emile looked confused. Hugh began to laugh. "I'm speaking English, same as you," said Paddy irritably. "What you mean by that, then?" His face reddened. "I think he needs you to slow down a bit. Apparently he's not familiar with Irish accents." "Bloody hell," said Paddy.